The first autumn wind at Fairmont Crest carries the metallic scent of damp rooftops and the plastic tang of newly hung signs along the boulevard, as if the town were trying to plaster a fresh coat of calm over walls long cracked by old secrets. And while that poised stillness drifts by, Naomi steps onto Orphe Jean's porch with a heartbeat steadied after days of turmoil, bringing the ring she has finally returned like a small certificate heavy as a stone. Finding June there, serene in a way that feels strange, as if everything precarious suspended above her could be steadied by a few cups of tea and a neatly stacked notebook. And then Naomi releases the relief of giving back the object that had clawed at her mind for months, while June lets out a light, rare giggle through the house walls, talking about the handsome man who brushed past her life like a sudden star, throwing a few rays into the darkest compartments of her heart. And Jacob arrives right on time to sit, watching June jot down each shard of feeling in her notebook as if she were analyzing a clinical case of her own soul, while Naomi, with a practical, seasoned eye, lays out rules of flirting not to incite missteps but to remind that every footfall should land on a foundation of self-respect and safe boundaries, until the half-playful, half-skeptical air pops like a soap bubble when June calmly draws the line between metaphor and fact, naming the man who makes both of them freeze, Ted, and that instant is a needle driven into their shared heart, sending up memories, warnings, disappointments, cuts, and a new panorama where every small movement sends ripples to Nicole and Leslie, like tossing a pebble into a pool that seemed quiet but never really stopped trembling. Naomi is not one to judge, yet she knows that warning someone is a difficult form of kindness, because no one wants to hear what weakens a brand new sprout of hope, and still she gathers her courage to face June in a silence so heavy you can hear the clock, laying out each layer of risk bound to the name Ted, a man who has just walked out of the rubble of a marriage with Nicole, who still carries shards from a betrayal involving Leslie, who is gasping after months of clinging to a redemption that may not exist, and Naomi sees she has grown too familiar with men hovering between past and future, kites that refuse to cut their strings yet never really catch the wind. So her counsel is not prohibition but fencing, not panic but a direct gaze that June must distinguish distraction from real possibility, tenderness born of effort from reassurance born of guilt. And Jacob sits quietly, a witness's hush, registering how thin the border is when weary hearts mistake the temporary for salvation. But June, with calluses from past stumbles, still senses in Ted something she has not had for a long time. An unhurried presence, a kind of listening without judgment, conversations that began aimless but quietly created a safe room where she did not have to sidestep her own darkness. And in her deepest layer, where survival had often been the only anchor, the feeling of being seen as a whole person rather than as a list of errors chips the bricks in her defensive wall. Once June's fortress cracks, Fairmont Crest storm surges in, because the town refuses gray areas. It chooses exposure or indictment or co-optation, turning every budding story into a stage for the crowd. And when old acquaintances whisper at the bar counter, when anonymous accounts in the neighborhood group quietly post a photo of Ted leaving the municipal building, when a half-page community values column prints in a local newsletter with moralizing breath about the decline of those recently divorced, June feels herself being named by shadowy, unjust fingers, while Ted braces against a new bog, where each step toward someone new can be read as a slap to someone old. Nicole is trying to learn how to breathe evenly in a house without the sound of Ted's shoes, but that absence accidentally stirs up a dry anger, an anger too parched for tears, and one morning, reading a rumor on her phone, her throat tightens at the idea of being replaced too quickly, wounds not yet closed being stepped on by unfamiliar soles, every attempt at retaining a bit of dignity twisted into a punchline for people who prefer verdicts to context. Leslie is quiet in another way. She does not pound the table, does not take the podium, but she speaks the language of leverage and influence, knows who owes her favors, which moral milestone to nudge to turn a suggestion into a trend. And in that frightening calm she begins to pull Ted's past back under the lights, not to win a man back but to remind him of the structure of invisible debts, that regret is his only remaining currency and it must be spent carefully, not on a string just. Sprouting. Ted is not blind either. He reads the looks through shop glass when he parks, the messages that offer no advice but end with ellipses, knows a coffee with June in the square can be trimmed into a headline sharp enough to sever months of work at normalcy. And in that recognition he wavers, not just under other people's pressure but under questions about his own motives. Does he reach for June to live differently or to prove to Nicole that living differently is possible? Does he lean into gentleness because he feels worthy or because he's too tired to face the chasm between himself and Leslie? Does he use June's listening as a gift or a temporary bandage on a wound that has not scabbed? His nights are hearings without counsel, where he is defendant and judge, witness and executioner, and the only unavoidable verdict is the mirror. He has not cut loose the dream of reconciliation with Nicole, a dream thin as smoke, wrapping his lungs whenever he thinks he can breathe something new. June sees that wavering, and what angers her is not that Ted is unready but that she is letting herself hope on sliding soil. She is angry at herself for hearing the giggle of ego at the feeling of being chosen, angry at the instinct to clutch warm air on long cold days, angry at Naomi for advice so right it's infuriating, angry at Jacob for that piercing look that opens her messy closet, and angry at the town for turning privacy into feed. That anger pushes her into hard decisions. Stop before falling deeper or go on under strict terms she sets for herself. Erect transparent boundaries that will not be bent or accept the gray of being human. She opens her notebook and drafts a list like a self-binding contract. She will not be anyone's savior, will not be a gauze for anyone's past, will not accept dates squeezed between guilt management sessions, will not confuse tenderness with a policy against loneliness, will not let a blurry promise stretch to infinity. Yet each clause stabs a different bruise, because asking for clarity from another means refusing to self-delude, and ending delusion puts hope on the operating table. Naomi goes home exhausted from doing the kindest, least loved work, dragging a friend from the lip of a cliff when the cliff looks like a sunset, but she is still uneasy, knowing her words might catalyze backlash, making June more determined to prove she is choosing freely, not puppet by caution. Naomi scolds herself for letting her old dislike of Ted bleed through, born partly from watching Leslie collapse beneath the town's double standards, partly from being the one to return that ring, feeling the invisible weight of shattered promises. And while she wants to protect June, she can't be sure she hasn't mixed protecting a friend with defending her personal code. Naomi's anger shifts to the wider mechanism. Why must women sit public ethics exams while men refit their charm with a few moments of honesty? Why is a woman's tears called weakness while a man's are called courage? Why do moral essays arrange facts to match prejudice rather than labor to understand motives? And within that anger is care, because she sees June weighing her heart like a jeweler measuring an uncut stone, hoping it will shine enough to justify the scratches. Leslie busies herself with a different plan, not loud but more dangerous than accusation. A plan to press Ted into terrain where every choice has a steep toll, to show him that all routes out of the past pass through a responsibility toll booth, and when responsibility is dodged the town will collect. She does not need to step into June's life with scorn. She needs only to let a few leaks appear, old debts, closed-door meetings, decisions made at night, handshakes without signatures, and each leak will cast a shadow over any new relationship of Ted's, making the woman beside him wonder whether she's walking with a present or dragging a past. Leslie is angry at Ted for taking a fragile trust and breaking it, angry at herself for staking so much on a single person, angry at the town for laughing when she lost her bet, but in her anger stands a pillar called fairness, and the only fair way she accepts is to make Ted linger in what he has avoided, not to get revenge but to close a door left ajar. Leslie's fairness is not gentle. It is pragmatic, and pragmatism in a judgment-hungry town is often mistaken for cruelty. Nicole watches from afar with the eyes of someone who has learned not to believe in miracles, and each time she hears June's name paired with Ted's, a chill arcs along her spine. Not purely jealousy but the reflex of a veteran leaving the battlefield only to see her old comrade already wearing a fresh cloak, and in that flicker, old music calls up old dancers. Questions of worth tapping out familiar steps. How much did she fail? How quickly can she be replaced? Is her apparent resilience just waterproof paint over hollow wood? Nicole's anger does not explode. It soaks into the grain of everyday life, turning coffee a half-tone more bitter, slowing footsteps by 2 beats, shortening email replies by a few words, and when she reads a rumor that Ted might join a public project with the town council backed by familiar donors, her heart contracts at the speed with which he is rebuilding after collapse, a speed that feels like a silent indictment of her slower pace. Against this backdrop, a chain of small but surgical events threads itself. A photo of Ted and June in front of Orphe Jean cropped to look like they are nestled into each other. An anonymous email to a community event committee hinting Ted is using his new relationship for soft influence. An internal memo conveniently leaked at the right moment to tie Leslie to a decision she only assessed, not approved. And finally, a brief comment at a council session suggesting the town needs moral steadiness from those in front. No names, but everyone turns. These waves drive June to a decision that can't be delayed. Either make boundaries and aims public, turning the relationship into a self-respect contract with clear terms, or quietly close it before she is taken hostage by a game of leverage. She chooses the harder path, opens her notebook, and writes a private account not sent to anyone, admitting her anger at her heart's stubborn fragility, at the habit of loving as rescue, at the need to be seen so badly she might confuse listening with a promise. Ted, at the same time, stands at a fork haunted by ghosts. He can step toward June, absorb the slander, and keep the chance to live differently. He can turn back toward Nicole with an apology late but real, or he can freeze between banks and become his worst self, the man who sells kindness for an extended hesitation. He knows any choice demands a price paid in someone's anger, in the wobble of newborn trust, in smashing the cheap comforts that once got him through. In that nerve-tight moment, he realizes what terrifies him most is not the public but writing an irrevocable pledge. A pledge to June would mean daily refusal to use the past as armor. A pledge to Nicole would mean gripping broken glass until the bleeding stops. A pledge to himself would mean there is no vacancy for ambiguity. Anger flies at him from all sides, and he is angry at himself, angry at his lifelong procrastination, angry at his way of turning every decision into an equation with infinite solutions to avoid solving it as the day slides toward dusk. Naomi returns to Orphe Jean and meets June in an unguarded quiet, and both women understand some roads must be walked alone, that the best counsel now is retreat, to make room for the other's inner honesty, that friendship also has borders, the border of respecting a choice even when it frightens you. Naomi does not repeat her warnings. She redirects her anger toward what deserves it most. Fairmont Crest's inflation machinery, the habit of weighing private lives on public scales, and she promises herself that if June falls, she will be there to lift her without waving any moral lesson flag. Leslie, at night, closes a file, recognizing she needs no more leverage. Truth is heavy enough, and she chooses to stop within the line her conscience draws, reminding herself that fairness is not the same as grinding someone to dust. Nicole powers down her phone, leans back, accepts that someone else moving on is not a sentence for her, that anger can become momentum if it doesn't feed on envy. Jacob shuts his notebook, sensing that sometimes the best role of a witness is to protect a fragile moment for others. No embroidery, no explanation on their behalf, and Ted and June, standing at opposite ends of a narrow bridge over dark, frothing water, know the next step will define them longer than they imagine. Know that if they choose each other, the town's relationship map will shift unpredictably. Know that if they step away, nothing returns to how it was. Because once a heart learns the language of hope, it cannot pretend illiteracy. Fairmont Crest holds its breath one heartbeat longer, as it always does when it smells change, and the rumor spinners are ready to tug new threads from the old tapestry. But in that absolutely private instant, there remain only 2 pulses, 2 questions, 2 inward fires, and 2 possibilities. A poorly timed rumor that wrecks it all, a confession too late that dismantles what they have just built, or the other way around, An old habit cut and bound by a new resolve strong enough to withstand. The first winds of the season. The future promises no favors, but it does not lock the exits either. And if there is anything worth watching, it is how people handle the fire burning inside without hurling it at others, how they choose responsibility rather than casting themselves as victims, how they dare to enter a relationship as if entering a pact with their own darkness. At Fairmont Crest, goodness rarely wins on day one, but sometimes it wins by endurance, and if June and Ted leap together, the town's map will need to be redrawn a little. If they stand still, the storm will redraw it without asking, and each will learn that reluctance is also a choice, only far more expensive than any choice they have ever dared to claim.